At my wedding reception, just as the servers poured champagne and the band began the gentle strains of our dance, my grandfather raised his glass and called out across the room, "Loving the beach mansion I gave you." The widespread chatter ceased. I froze in place. "What mansion?" I uttered, my voice cracking. "I was never allowed to live there." The music halted. My husband's hand tightened around mine. My grandfather looked at me, then slowly turned his gaze towards my parents and my older brother. Their faces grew pale. My mother nervously adjusted her clutch. My father stared at the floor, and Ryan, my brother, turned a shade of white I'd never witnessed on him. Then, chaos erupted. You see, merely 3 months prior, my grandfather had transferred ownership of a seaside estate, intended as his wedding gift, to me. Yet, I never received it, never heard a word about it, never even set foot inside. In that moment, standing there in my wedding gown beneath fairy lights and rented chandeliers, I realized something was dreadfully amiss. And it was just the beginning. What followed was not merely drama, it was war. They had not only taken a home from me, but also trust, my rightful legacy, and the life I was meant to build. But I reclaimed it all, every single inch. Stay with me, because this isn't just a wedding story, it's a reckoning. Charlotte Adams had always been a woman who disliked commotion. At 32, she had meticulously built a stable life on her own terms, working as an architect in San Francisco, renowned for her precision and quiet resolve. She was the type of person who remembered birthdays, brought muffins to early meetings, and rarely raised her voice, even when it was justified. Her engagement to Daniel felt like the final piece of a puzzle. He was from a reputable family, held a respectable job, and never expected her to be anything other than composed. Their wedding had been planned with the same meticulous care she applied to her blueprints. Every detail accounted for, nothing excessively extravagant, everything perfectly arranged. The Napa Valley vineyard shimmered under a soft afternoon sun, casting a golden light that transformed even the simplest moments into cinematic scenes. Rows of chairs lined a perfectly manicured lawn. Guests wore muted tones, linen suits and pastel dresses, the kind of attire typically featured in lifestyle magazines. As Charlotte stood under a floral arch with Daniel by her side, she tried to quell a small knot of unease in her stomach, attributing it to nerves. The ceremony proceeded flawlessly. Vows were exchanged, rings placed, and when the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, a ripple of polite, warm applause spread through the crowd. Glasses clinked during the cocktail hour, and laughter blended with the soft strains of a live jazz trio. Charlotte's mother, Vivian, bustled about, adjusting tablecloths and whispering instructions to the event planner. Gregory, her father, observed from the sidelines, content to let the proceedings unfold without interference. Ryan, her older brother, moved effortlessly among the guests, shaking hands and flashing the sort of smile that could sell a lie and make you grateful for it. Charlotte sat beside Daniel at the head table as the toasts commenced. One by one, friends and relatives rose, offering carefully crafted anecdotes about love and personal growth. Then, Walter Adams, her grandfather, stood up. He required no microphone. Even in his late 70s, his voice carried an authority that commanded attention. Dressed in a sharp navy suit, his silver hair neatly combed back, he held his champagne glass with a steady hand. "To Charlotte and Daniel," he began, his voice smooth with a hint of gravel, like well-worn wood. "May your love be strong, your foundation steady, and your home, especially the one by the sea, bring you joy for years to come." A faint ripple of polite laughter spread. Then he continued, "I hope you're enjoying the beach house I gave you earlier this year, sweetheart. It's not every day I hand over prime Carmel Point real estate." Charlotte's smile froze. Slowly, she turned toward her grandfather, as if she had misheard him. The room, previously filled with low conversations and clinking glasses, became utterly silent. "What beach house?" she asked, not loudly, yet with enough resonance to pierce the quiet. Walter chuckled softly, as if she were jesting. "The one in Carmel, February. I had the deed transferred to your name. Didn't anyone tell you?" Charlotte's eyes swept the room. Daniel's hand twitched subtly on the tablecloth. Vivian appeared to have forgotten how to blink. Gregory suddenly found his cufflinks fascinating, but it was Ryan who truly caught her attention. He was pale, then flushed, then carefully neutral. His jaw clenched and he looked away, taking a drink too quickly. "I never heard about any house," Charlotte stated, this time louder. Murmurs erupted, a buzz of confusion swelling like static. Someone near the bar gasped. Another whispered, "Oh my God!" too audibly to be discreet. Walter's gaze shifted from Charlotte to Vivian, then to Gregory, finally settling on Ryan. His smile vanished. "You didn't tell her?" he asked, not accusingly, but with the steady disbelief of someone comprehending a betrayal in real time. "Is that what this is?" Vivian stood, placing her napkin on the table. "Dad, maybe now's not the time." "I think it is," he interrupted sharply, his voice no longer warm. "She deserves to know." Charlotte pushed back her chair. It scraped loudly against the floor. Her chest tightened as a dozen facts began to coalesce in her mind. An overheard conversation last month between Ryan and her parents about property taxes. Daniel deflecting her suggestion for a honeymoon near the coast. A sudden discomfort whenever real estate was mentioned at dinner. Her own wedding reception suddenly felt alien, as if she had stumbled onto someone else's stage. She didn't cry, not then, but the pressure behind her eyes throbbed like a warning. Walter reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. After a few taps, Charlotte's phone buzzed in her clutch. She retrieved it, reading the message. "Meet me tomorrow. Come alone." She looked up. He was already moving from the mic stand, walking slowly toward the edge of the tent, past the curious, bewildered gazes of family and guests. He did not look back. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of forced small talk and brittle smiles. Daniel attempted to console her with empty words and overly chilled champagne. Her mother repeatedly urged her to just let it go, until Charlotte finally ceased responding. Ryan never approached her again, and though her father offered a weak smile from across the dance floor, it faded before reaching his eyes. Charlotte stood near the vineyard's edge as the sun dipped behind the hills. Somewhere behind her, guests laughed and music played, but she felt utterly disconnected from it all. No longer the bride, no longer the obedient daughter, no longer the forgotten sibling. She was someone new now, and tomorrow she would discover precisely who. Charlotte barely slept that night. After the shock of the wedding toast and the silent tension that consumed the remainder of the evening, her body had moved on autopilot. She danced when expected, smiled when cameras were pointed her way, and thanked guests with words she barely recalled uttering. Yet, beneath her composed exterior, her mind incessantly replayed her grandfather's words. The beach house, a gift. And everyone's faces, especially Ryan's, paling and then remaining silent. No one offered an explanation, not a single word was spoken. At 9:15 the next morning, she parked her car on a quiet street overlooking the ocean in Santa Barbara. The sun was already warm, and the breeze carried the distinct scent of eucalyptus and sea salt. The address her grandfather had texted led to a Mediterranean-style home nestled behind an ornate wrought iron gate. The stucco walls were a soft white, and bougainvillea cascaded over the terrace in vibrant pinks, the kind of place Charlotte had dreamed about as a girl. She pulled up to the call box and pressed the buzzer. "Name?" a clipped male voice inquired. "Charlotte Adams," she replied, adjusting her sunglasses. There was a pause. "I'm sorry, Mom. This residence is under Ryan Adams. Do you have an appointment?" Charlotte's throat tightened. "I believe this house was gifted to me by Walter Adams. I'm his granddaughter. Please, just let me speak to someone inside." "I can't do that," the man stated. Mr. Adams gave explicit instructions. No access unless he's present. Before she could respond, the gate creaked open. A tall woman with sleek dark hair and a crisp linen blouse appeared behind it. Grace. Charlotte recognized her instantly. Her sister-in-law's expression was unreadable. Cool, polite, but not overtly unfriendly. It's fine, Tom, Grace called to the guard. I'll handle it. Charlotte stepped out of her car slowly, unsure how to approach this interaction. Grace gestured for her to come inside. As Charlotte walked through the gate, her eyes swept across the house and yard, trying to ground herself. It felt surreal, as if she were trespassing in a place that, by all logic, should have been hers. I didn't know you'd be coming by, Grace said lightly, leading her toward the front door. A bit of a surprise. I didn't plan it either, Charlotte replied. I got a message from Grandpa. He told me to come. Grace hesitated for a beat, then gave a short nod. He's not here, but you can come in for a moment if you like. Inside, the house was elegant and cold, the kind of home that seemed staged for a lifestyle magazine rather than authentically lived in. Pale wood floors, minimalist furniture, and white walls reflected the morning light. Charlotte followed Grace through the open foyer and into what appeared to be a library, filled with bookshelves, modern art, and a large picture window framing the ocean. As Grace excused herself to take a phone call, Charlotte's eyes scanned the room. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, perhaps some sign of her grandfather, something to assure her this wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was then that she noticed it. A small stack of unopened mail nestled on the corner of a low shelf. Her own name, Charlotte Adams, stood out, penned in an unmistakable script. The cream-coloured envelope lacked a return address. She edged closer, careful not to disturb it, simply gazing. The handwriting bore a striking resemblance to Aunt Marjorie's, Walter's younger sister, whom she hadn't encountered in years. As her hand began to extend, a voice from behind startled her, inquiring about her search. She spun around abruptly. Ryan appeared in the doorway, one hand casually in his pocket, the other holding a glass containing an amber liquid. His tone was nonchalant, but his eyes were piercing. Charlotte maintained a level voice. I came to understand what Grandpa meant, why he believed I resided here. Ryan let out a soft chuckle, stepping into the room. Did you genuinely believe they'd permit you to possess something like this? Come on, Char. You've always been the dreamer, not the closer. Charlotte remained unfazed. He bestowed it upon me. That was the gift. Ryan took a slow sip. Indeed. And you imagine that merely because he signed a document, it becomes yours. That's not how things operate in our family. They never have. As he spoke, Charlotte's gaze settled on an open briefcase situated just past his elbow on a side table. A yellow folder, emblazoned with bold black text, was partially tucked beneath it. She could just discern the title, Glenview Title Transfer. Her breath hitched. Ryan's eyes followed hers, yet he remained silent. Charlotte's hand slid into her coat pocket, finding her phone. She kept her expression neutral as the camera shutter clicked softly, masked by the sound of Ryan's next sip. You should depart, he stated after a moment. Grace disapproves of unexpected visitors. As do I, Charlotte acknowledged with a slow nod. I'll be seeing Grandpa later. I believe we both have a few inquiries to make. Ryan smirked, but his jaw tightened. As she turned to exit, her mind raced. That envelope bearing her name, the document, Ryan's reaction, confident yet too quick to dismiss. Something was amiss, and she was not prepared to let it go. She stepped out into the Santa Barbara sunlight, her heart thumping. The gate clanged shut behind her. What had begun as mere confusion was evolving into something entirely different. This was no longer solely about a house. It was about trust, legacy, and authority, and Charlotte Adams was no longer the docile daughter who refrained from asking questions. Her journey had just commenced. Charlotte once again navigated the winding coastal road, the ocean glistening to her right in the soft morning light. The air carried a faint scent of salt and eucalyptus, familiar, yet distant. The echo of Ryan's words from the previous day resonated in her mind. "You really thought they'd let you keep this?" She hadn't responded then, unable to. The silent weight of the house, with its locked gates and guarded truths, had rendered her speechless. But now, as she approached the same towering wrought-iron gates of the Santa Barbara estate, there was no hesitation. She wasn't there for a confrontation. She wasn't ready for that. She simply needed to see it again, this time with a fresh perspective. She parked a block away, opting to walk the remaining distance. The gravel crunched softly beneath her shoes as she approached the fence. The house was quiet, shutters drawn, no sound emanating from within. She stood still for a moment, her eyes scanning the exterior. White stucco walls, a curved terracotta roof, arched windows. It was elegant, pristine, but it wasn't the grandeur that captivated her. It was something subtler, something ancient. Charlotte ventured along the side path that curved alongside the garden wall. No one stopped her this time. The guard must have been off duty, or perhaps she was simply invisible in that moment, a shadow retracing steps she once knew intimately. At the edge of the stone wall, her breath hitched. There it was, the tree, the lilac tree, still standing. It was taller now, of course. Its slender trunk had thickened, its roots more firmly gripping the earth, but it leaned ever so slightly toward the gate, just as it always had. Charlotte drew closer, kneeling beside it. Her fingers brushed the bark, rough and weathered, yet unmistakably familiar. She had been 8 when she and Grandpa Walter planted it. It had been spring, and he had brought the sapling in the back of his truck, carefully wrapped in burlap and hope. "This one's yours," he had declared, patting the ground. "Lilacs are stubborn and gentle, just like you." They had dug the hole together, her hands caked with dirt, his voice humming an old Navy tune as they toiled. It was the first thing she'd ever cultivated, and it remained here. She blinked, and suddenly memories flooded in like a summer storm. The wind chimes that once graced the pergola, the gentle creak of the porch swing where she would curl up with a book, the lingering scent of lemon polish and her grandmother's perfume that always pervaded the hallway. It had all been here, her childhood, her joy, her sanctuary. But one day, it had vanished. No explanation, no family meeting, no dramatic argument, just a shift. Her mother Vivian had simply stated, "We're relocating, and don't inquire why." And when Charlotte had asked if they would ever return, Vivian's reply had been colder than the fog drifting off the ocean. This house was never truly ours. After that, it was as if the house had never existed. No one mentioned it, no photographs remained. If Charlotte ever brought it up, the room fell silent. Her father would clear his throat, her mother would change the subject, Ryan would smirk. But now she realised the house hadn't disappeared. It had merely been appropriated. Her hand closed around the edge of a stepping stone as she sat on the ground. Her eyes traced the house's facade, now acutely aware of every corner, every memory concealed beneath stucco and fresh paint. It wasn't just a house, it was the repository of everything she had once cherished, before being told it was never hers to love. And now it belonged to Ryan. Charlotte rose slowly, brushing off her skirt. The ache in her chest wasn't merely from betrayal, it was grief. Not for the house itself, but for the little girl who had once believed she belonged somewhere, that she mattered enough to be remembered. She redirected her gaze to the tree. A few blossoms had already unfurled, small, delicate lilac clusters reaching for the sun. Charlotte smiled faintly despite herself. It was still blooming, despite everything. Despite the silence, the theft, and the years of being erased, it had bloomed, just like her. She took one last look at the house, committing it to memory once more, not as a stranger looking in, but as someone reclaiming what had once been a part of her soul. She didn't knock on the door, didn't confront Ryan or Grace. That moment would arrive, but not today. Today wasn't about confrontation, it was about confirmation. She wasn't irrational, she wasn't imagining things. This place had been hers. The lilac tree had attested to it, and deep down, she now understood the truth. They hadn't merely stolen a property, they had attempted to erase her. But Charlotte Adams was no longer the girl who remained silent when doors closed. She was a woman now, one with questions that demanded answers and roots that ran far deeper than they imagined. She left the garden silently, pulling out her phone only once to capture a photo of the tree. Not for posting or sharing, but to preserve a timestamp, a truth. As she made her way back to the car, the coastal wind caught the hem of her jacket and swept her hair across her face. She didn't bother to adjust it. Her mind was already racing ahead to documents, dates, signatures, and silences. The next step would not be emotional, it would be precise, because this was no longer just about a house. It was about legacy, and hers was no longer something she was willing to allow others to define. Charlotte barely slept the night after her revisit to the beach house. The saline scent of the ocean clung to her skin like a persistent memory, and her thoughts repeatedly drifted to the faded lilac bush, still blooming near the fence where she and her grandfather had once planted it together. Yet sentimentality held no sway in what was to come next. By morning, she was already in her car, expertly navigating through traffic, en route to Los Angeles, her eyes focused and her mind resolute. The county recorder's office stood like a concrete vestige amidst a cluster of nondescript municipal buildings, as grey and uninviting as the secrets it housed within. Fluorescent lights flickered above rows of steel filing cabinets and computer terminals. A reception desk, framed with worn marble, greeted her with bureaucratic indifference. She approached the front desk. "Good morning, I'm here to examine property records, specifically title transfers for a residence in Santa Barbara, registered under Walter Adams," she stated, maintaining a steady tone. The clerk, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses perched precariously on her nose, looked up at her with an understanding expression. "Family property dispute?" she inquired, not unkindly. Charlotte offered a tight nod. "Something along those lines." "Follow me," the woman said, rising with a soft grunt. "I'm Darlene." They proceeded down a hallway lined with cabinets that appeared untouched for decades. Darlene retrieved a ring of brass keys, unlocked one of the cabinets labelled "Private Residential, Last 5 Years," and began sifting through the files with practiced efficiency. Finally, she extracted 2 manila folders and presented them to Charlotte. "Here," she said, "this is what you're seeking. Take your time. There's a copier down the hall, the third door on the right." Charlotte thanked her and carried the files with the reverence of someone holding a fragment of her own past. She located the small, dimly lit room, settled at a metal table, and opened the first folder. The topmost document bore the date March 3rd. Her grandfather's name, Walter C. Adams, was clearly typed at the top. The grantee field listed Charlotte Elizabeth Adams, her full name. The address indicated the Santa Barbara beach residence, and below the notarization and signature block, a handwritten clause declared, "This gift is irrevocable and shall remain under the sole ownership of Charlotte Adams, unless voided by death or criminal act." The ink had blurred slightly into the paper. Authentic ink, a real pen, and unmistakably her grandfather's script, which she recognized from birthday cards and the notes he used to place under her car's windshield wipers. After scrutinizing this document, she then opened the second folder, dated March 5th, merely 2 days later. The property address was an exact match, yet this time, the grantee field listed Ryan Gregory Adams, her brother. Charlotte froze. The formatting appeared almost identical, with the same header and notary layout, but something felt amiss. Her grandfather's signature seemed unnervingly flawless, like a template copy. She placed the first page alongside it and focused intently. The loops were overly smooth, the slant too uniform. Her grandfather's actual signature always exhibited a slight tremor at its conclusion, particularly on curved letters. Here, it was impeccable, suspiciously so. She turned to the bottom of the page. There was no handwritten clause, no supplementary notation, just the typed fields and a digital timestamp. Her eyes narrowed. Whoever had submitted this document intended to deceive, but executed it poorly. Without hesitation, Charlotte retrieved her phone, launched the scanner application, and began capturing each page. Once saved, she uploaded the files to her cloud account, then emailed them to 2 separate personal addresses. Following a brief pause, she drafted a new email to Arthur Langley, someone she hadn't communicated with in nearly 5 years. Arthur had served as her grandfather's attorney for over 2 decades, a quiet, meticulous man with an impeccable reputation in estate law. He had retired 3 years prior, but she vividly recalled his words at her grandfather's 85th birthday. "If anything ever seems off, don't wait for the world to tell you you're not crazy. Call me." She hoped he still monitored that email address. The subject line read, "Urgent. Title irregularity for Santa Barbara property." The message stated, "Arthur, I believe there has been tampering with the title transfer of my grandfather's home. I've attached 2 documents. One I believe to be legitimate and the other possibly forged. Please advise if you can assist or recommend someone. Time is critical. Charlotte Adams." She attached the scanned documents, took one final look to ensure everything was correctly labelled, and then pressed send. She watched the loading bar traverse the screen, willing it to deliver a lifeline. As she departed the records room, Darlene looked up again. "Did you find what you needed, honey?" Charlotte met her gaze. "I found more than I wanted, but exactly what I came for." Darlene offered a small, knowing smile. "It's always family, isn't it?" Charlotte offered no reply. She walked through the cold hallways, emerging into the midday sun's warmth. The world appeared unchanged, yet everything within her had fundamentally shifted. This was no longer merely about a house. It was about the integrity of her name, her history, her worth. She entered her car, started the engine, and merged into traffic. Amidst the cacophony of horns and flashing lights, her phone vibrated. A new email from Arthur Langley. Subject, received. I'll call you tonight. Charlotte exhaled for the first time in hours. She had no idea where this path would lead, but one truth resonated. She wouldn't let it go. Not this time. Even before she exited the car, Charlotte sensed the gravity of her impending encounter. The scent of lavender and damp earth permeated the air as she approached the single-story craftsman-style house, her grandfather's current residence. It was modest, certainly less imposing than the Santa Barbara estate, but every shingle and every cracked stone along the pathway whispered of familiarity. This had been his home for over 30 years, a place of tranquility, of rootedness, the kind of house that guarded its secrets without shame. She knocked once, and the door opened almost immediately. Walter stood there, his shoulders a bit more stooped than she remembered, yet his eyes retained their sharpness. Age had not dulled them. If anything, it had refined their ability to penetrate pretense. He gave a brief nod and stepped aside, allowing her entry. "I didn't know if you'd come," he stated, leading her into the den. "I had to," she replied. "You knew I would." They sat opposite each other, the silence stretching between them, not as an uncomfortable void, but as a deliberate pause between chords. The den remained largely unchanged over the years: oak bookshelves, a well-worn leather chair, and the same brass lamp that had illuminated her childhood bedtime stories. But now it held a different, heavier atmosphere. Walter reached for a locked drawer in the cabinet beside him. His fingers, still steady, turned the key and retrieved a thick folder tied with a black ribbon. He placed it on the coffee table and looked at her, not as a grandfather gazing at his granddaughter, but as a man about to alter the course of someone's life. "This," he announced, "is the contingency trust." Charlotte hesitated before opening it, her fingers brushing against the crisp feel of the documents within. She read slowly, seeing her name repeated again and again. She flipped through the pages. One outlined full ownership of the Santa Barbara Beach property. Another detailed a 40% controlling interest in the Addams Family Foundation, a trust that had quietly donated millions over the years to veterans' housing projects and youth scholarships. A third document granted her 30% of the vineyards in Arizona, including rights to expansion parcels and the income from 3 future harvests. This is all mine?" she asked quietly, still searching for some caveat. "It has been," Walter affirmed, "since the day I realized no one else in this family deserved it." Charlotte looked up, stunned. Walter leaned forward. "You never asked for anything, Charlotte. Not when your mother iced you out of family events. Not when Ryan took credit for your university grant work. You were quiet. Too quiet. But you watched, and you waited. That takes strength, not silence." She sat back, speechless. Walter's voice softened, yet an undercurrent of resolve remained beneath the calm. "Vivian came to me last year after I was in the hospital. She brought a new will, said it was time to simplify the estate, make Ryan the sole trustee. She framed it like concern, said I wasn't thinking clearly anymore." "You didn't sign it, did you?" Charlotte's voice tightened. "Oh, I signed it," he said with a bitter laugh, "but not before taking it straight to Arthur Langley, and not before filing this." He gestured to the folder. "Everything in that revised will was invalid. Arthur helped me establish this trust, quietly, legally, and in full compliance. That other document, she thought it meant something. It doesn't. It was a performance, a power grab. But this here, this is the real endgame." Charlotte flipped through the pages again. Each one had been notarized, signed, dated, and witnessed. The trust bore a stamp from the Superior Court. The language was airtight. "Why didn't you tell me before?" she asked. "Because I needed to know if you'd fight for it," he replied. "I couldn't hand you a legacy unless I knew you'd defend it. And I wanted to see how far they'd go to keep it from you. Now I know." She remained there, stunned by the enormity of it. All this time she had been quietly marginalized, reduced to the daughter who didn't ask questions, the sister who didn't push back. She had played a small part because the space allotted to her was small. And yet, he had seen her. He had known, and he had waited. "Why me?" she whispered. Walter smiled for the first time that morning. "Because you still remember the lilac tree." She felt her throat constrict. "You didn't forget where you came from, and you never tried to buy your way back in. That tells me everything I need to know about how you'll handle what's coming." Charlotte gently placed the folder down as if it were a living thing. "So, what happens next?" she inquired. Walter's voice was quiet. "You take the documents to Arthur. He'll register everything. You'll protect the trust. And when the rest of them come with their threats and tears and stories, you won't flinch." "I'm not like them," she asserted. He nodded. "I know. That's why you'll win." Charlotte stood and reached for the folder. It was heavier than it appeared. She held it close to her chest and met his eyes one last time before stepping out into the day. She had arrived here uncertain. She would leave with a profound sense of purpose. This wasn't merely about money or land or names on deeds. It was about truth, about reclaiming what had almost been lost. Not just a legacy of wealth, but a legacy of character. And now, it was hers to protect. Charlotte waited until after dinner, needing Daniel to be relaxed, off guard, not halfway out the door with his mind on work or his phone. She had prepared one of his favourites, grilled salmon with lemon herb butter, asparagus and wild rice, and poured 2 glasses of wine from a bottle they had received as a wedding gift. He complimented the meal, smiled as usual, and even cleared the dishes, but Charlotte barely tasted a thing. Once the plates were in the dishwasher and the quiet had settled, she sat down across from him at the small kitchen table, the folder still unopened beside her. "Daniel," she began carefully, "can I ask you something? And I really want the truth." He looked up from his glass, his eyes guarded. "Of course. What's going on?" She hesitated for only a second. "Did you know anything at all, about the house in Santa Barbara before the wedding?" Daniel blinked, then slowly shook his head. "What? No. Why would I?" Charlotte stared at him. "I need you to think carefully," she urged, "because I've already seen the documents. The house was gifted to me. Then, suddenly, 2 days later, Ryan had the title changed." In that pivotal moment, in the space between heartbeats, a revelation hung in the air. A silence extended far too long for comfort. Daniel, rubbing the back of his neck, let out a weary sigh. "Look, a few weeks before the wedding, Ryan cornered me," he began, saying something ambiguous about your grandfather's growing forgetfulness and the potential complications with the house. Charlotte, her chest constricting, remained motionless, her voice surprisingly steady. "What kind of complication?" He divulged. "He mentioned a mix-up regarding the intended recipient of the house, that perhaps your grandfather didn't genuinely intend to name you, suggesting it might have been a mere clerical oversight." "And you actually believed that?" "I didn't know what to believe." Then softened his tone. "Ryan made it seem like it wasn't worth stirring up trouble, that everything would be discreetly handled, saving you from family drama. I just assumed, I don't know, that if it were truly serious, someone would have informed you." "You mean, you assumed I had no need to know?" "You stood beside me at the altar, fully aware that my own brother had defrauded me, that my family had deceived me, and you uttered not a single word. No, you don't get to spin this, not now. You don't get to play the peacemaker when you were complicit in the silence. I was utterly humiliated at my own wedding, Daniel, in front of everyone, because I was the only one oblivious to the script." He rose, pacing towards the counter. "I didn't want to ruin the wedding." She shot back. "You didn't want to ruin the image of the wedding, did you? There's a distinct difference." "I thought I was protecting you," he insisted. "No," she countered, her voice sharpening. "You were protecting them, because it was easier, because silence is easier, because no one wants to be the one to disrupt the pretty picture." Daniel turned to face her, his frustration evident. "What was I supposed to do? Accuse your family of fraud the night before our wedding?" "Yes," Charlotte replied without hesitation. "If you loved me, that's precisely what you were supposed to do." Her words landed with the weight of a stone. For a protracted period, neither spoke. Charlotte walked over to the table, picked up the folder, and held it to her chest. "I met with my grandfather," she said softly. "He gave me everything, not just the house. There's a trust now, legally binding, completely separate from anything my mother or Ryan manipulated. I have documents, witnesses, proof." Daniel blinked. "Wait, he gave you everything?" "He gave me what he never trusted them to have. And now I know why." There was a pause. Daniel seemed about to speak, but she didn't allow him the chance. "I don't need to debate this anymore," she continued. "From this point on, I'm handling things myself. My property, my rights, my future. You made your choice when you stayed quiet." He stared at her, a flicker of regret in his eyes. "Charlotte." But she shook her head. "No, don't apologize, not tonight." She walked past him, heading down the hallway. As she reached the bedroom door, she glanced back one final time. "I don't know what happens next for us," she stated, "but I do know this. I will never again let someone else decide how much of the truth I'm allowed to hear." With that, she closed the door behind her, leaving Daniel in the lingering quiet. 3 days after Charlotte's final conversation with Daniel, the envelope arrived. Its presence, though not unexpected, sent a hollow ache through her stomach. The thick packet, delivered by courier, bore the seal of the Superior Court of California. She stood in the narrow hallway of her apartment, holding it for a long minute before breaking the seal. Ryan had filed a lawsuit. Charlotte skimmed the document with numb eyes. He was petitioning the court to invalidate her ownership of the Santa Barbara property, claiming that Walter Adams had lacked mental capacity when he attempted to transfer the deed. The suit alleged that Charlotte had coerced an elderly man into gifting her the home and cited a pattern of emotional manipulation, financial pressure, and undue influence. At the bottom was Ryan's signature, bold and arrogant, followed by the name of his attorney, a litigator known for aggressive tactics in high-value estate disputes. She reread the lines again, slower this time. Each sentence struck like a betrayal sharpened into legal language. It didn't take long for the second blow to come. Later that afternoon, an email from her mother arrived. The subject line was empty, but the body carried all the weight Charlotte could stomach. "Charlotte, you've broken this family for a house. A house! You've humiliated your brother. You've caused your father's health to worsen from the stress. And you've shattered any hope of peace between us. All for what? Some coastline property. Whatever your grandfather gave you, it wasn't permission to turn on your blood. You should be ashamed. Vivian." Charlotte stared at the screen, her jaw tightening. There was no acknowledgement of the trust, no mention of what had been stolen from her, just guilt. Pure, concentrated, generational guilt packaged into neat sentences. By nightfall, things had escalated. A call came from Arthur Langley's assistant, asking her to check her social media. Charlotte didn't even use her accounts regularly, but when she logged in, she found her inbox flooded. Screenshots, hundreds of them, of messages allegedly sent from her to a cousin 2 years earlier. In them, she appeared to complain about her family in language so venomous it made her stomach turn. There were references to manipulating her grandfather, disparaging Ryan and Vivian in cruel and calculated detail. The tone was vicious, greedy, and vindictive. It was everything her family would want the world to believe about her. But she hadn't written any of it. Some of the phrasing was unnatural, the punctuation too stiff, too clean. The timing of the messages was also strange. Some allegedly sent while she had been on a flight to Chicago. Another dated on her grandmother's funeral day, when she hadn't touched her phone for hours. Whoever fabricated them hadn't done enough research, but at first glance, they looked real. Arthur called later that evening. "I want you to forward every screenshot to me," he said, his tone low and clipped. "Also, I need access to the metadata from any device you've used to post online over the last 3 years. We're going to trace every byte." "Do you think Ryan forged them?" Charlotte asked. "I think Ryan paid someone else to forge them. He's arrogant, but he's not tech-savvy. These look like the work of someone who knows their way around spoofing and data injection, possibly a hired IT consultant. Either way, I'll find it." "What about the lawsuit?" she asked. "We'll respond formally, of course, but the more immediate danger is public opinion. This family thrives on appearance. These messages weren't created for the court. They were created for the people watching from the sidelines. They want to turn you into the villain." Charlotte stood at her window, looking out over the quiet street below, the phone pressed to her ear. Her hands were steady now, her voice clearer than it had been in days. "Then we make sure the truth speaks louder." Arthur paused. "You're prepared for this?" "I wasn't," she admitted, "but I am now." "Good," he said, "because they're not finished, and neither are we." Charlotte ended the call and closed the curtains. She opened her laptop and began sorting every piece of evidence: photographs, emails, dates, travel records, and every line of the trust documents Walter had handed her. She labelled folders, created backups, encrypted drives. They wanted a fight. She would give them one. And this time, she wouldn't be the one hiding behind silence. The following week began with a quiet urgency. Charlotte sat in Arthur Langley's office high above downtown Los Angeles, the blinds partially closed against the midday sun. She hadn't slept much, but there was a clarity in her gaze that Arthur had come to recognize. She was no longer reacting. She was preparing. Arthur entered the room with a small stack of papers and a man following closely behind. The man was wiry, with thick-rimmed glasses and a laptop under his arm. He wore no tie, just a pressed shirt and a calm expression that seemed unbothered by the legal storm surrounding them. "This is Daniel Cho," Arthur said, "digital forensic consultant. I've used him on a number of cases involving document forgery and metadata tracking. He's the best." Cho gave Charlotte a brief nod, then opened his laptop. "I've reviewed the documents you forwarded, the so-called messages and the PDF of the property transfer file your brother submitted." Charlotte leaned forward as he pulled up a screen, lines of code and metadata fields scrolling across. "Let's start with the text messages. Whoever faked them used a timestamp spoofer, but the formatting is clumsy. The character encoding doesn't match what your device would have produced, and the font weight is inconsistent. More importantly, we trace the IP address associated with the message backups to a location linked to a private office network, not your home network, not your phone provider. But that's just the appetizer." Arthur motioned for him to continue. Cho clicked into a new tab. "The big discovery came from the PDF your brother submitted to the court to justify his version of the deed. The file was supposedly created by your grandfather's legal advisor, but the metadata tells a different story." He zoomed into a field labeled Author. "It reads eradams.internal. Charlotte stared at the screen. "Ryan." Cho nodded. "And not just that. We tracked the internal ID tag to a terminal previously registered with the Adams and Lockley Legal Group. This is your family's private law firm, isn't it?" Arthur's tone became notably sharper as he pressed the point. Cho meticulously tapped the timestamp field on the screen. Charlotte slowly drew in a breath, a silent acknowledgement as the intricate pieces of the puzzle began to interlock, each revelation more deliberate and incriminating than the last. This wasn't merely an act of carelessness. It was a meticulously orchestrated scheme built upon a foundation of privileged access, misplaced trust, and a sense of absolute entitlement. Arthur rose from his seat, his gaze unwavering. "This transcends simple forgery. This is incontrovertible digital evidence of a premeditated intent to defraud. And now, we act." He swiftly picked up the phone on his desk and dialed his paralegal's extension. "Diane, prepare the emergency injunction immediately." Charlotte turned to him, a question in her eyes. "What exactly does that entail?" Arthur faced her, his expression set with steely resolve. "We are filing a motion with the court to freeze all transactions related to the Santa Barbara property. This will be effective immediately. That encompasses any potential sale, lease, transfer, or any modification whatsoever of its ownership. Not a single paperclip will be moved into or out of that house until this case reaches its full resolution." Cho then handed Charlotte a folder. "This contains the complete digital report. It has been independently timestamped and meticulously notarized through our secure blockchain system, ensuring an unimpeachable chain of custody. No one can tamper with this evidence now." Charlotte received the folder, her hands remarkably steady. For weeks, she had endured the sight of lies coiling around her life like tenacious ivy, suffocating everything she had believed to be rightfully hers. But now, for the first time, she held the tangible embodiment of truth in her hands, verified, undeniable. Arthur was already pacing, a man of action. "Once the judge reviews this, Ryan's entire case will crumble. We will not only conclusively prove your rightful ownership, but we will also definitively expose his attempt at falsification. And should the court establish an intent to deceive, Ryan could face severe criminal penalties." Charlotte's face remained impassive. She neither smiled nor flinched. Yet something profound shifted in her eyes, not vengeance nor even anger, but rather an unshakable certainty. "What happens after the injunction is secured?" she inquired steadily. Arthur looked at her with a rare expression, one conveying profound respect. "Then," he stated firmly, "we pursue everything he attempted to seize from you, and we reclaim it." Within the hour, the injunction had been formally filed. Charlotte meticulously signed the affidavit in triplicate, reviewed the accompanying exhibits, and watched as Arthur submitted the comprehensive packet to the court's digital system for expedited review. As the sun began its descent, the Santa Barbara County Recorder's Office received the official freeze order. Charlotte then received a digital notification unequivocally confirming the restriction placed on the property deed. For the first time since her grandfather's wedding toast, the momentum had decisively swung. Ryan had made the critical error of misinterpreting her silence as a sign of weakness. Now, that very silence would become her most potent ally, powerfully buttressed by irrefutable evidence, the full force of the law, and her unwavering refusal to yield. The house was no longer merely hers by virtue of inheritance, it was now hers by undeniable fact, and the truth, once something she desperately sought to uncover, was now something she was fully prepared to wield. The meticulously arranged arbitration hearing convened in a private conference suite, offering a commanding view of downtown Los Angeles. Floor-to-ceiling windows admitted a stark, white light that did little to alleviate the palpable tension permeating the room. Charlotte sat composedly beside Arthur at a lengthy oak table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her outer calm barely concealing the seething turmoil beneath. This was it, the pivotal moment they had been relentlessly building towards for weeks. Across from her sat Ryan, impeccably dressed, exuding an air of confident, almost smug assurance. Adjacent to him was his attorney, a rapid-fire litigator named Howard Grimm, whose notorious specialty lay in discrediting witnesses with a deceptive blend of charm and surgical precision. At the far end of the table presided the arbitrator, a retired judge, his gaze cold and meticulous, specifically chosen for his unimpeachable objectivity. The proceedings commenced with the standard exchange of introductions and opening statements. Arthur spoke first, his voice clear and resolute, meticulously outlining their position and their unequivocal intent to present evidence that would irrevocably dismantle Ryan's claim of sole ownership. However, before they could advance further, Grimm rose and presented a folder to the arbitrator. "With your esteemed permission," Grimm began, his voice smooth, "we would like to submit supplementary evidence that directly challenges the credibility and character of Miss Adams." Charlotte's stomach involuntarily tightened. The arbitrator offered a curt nod, and Grimm, adopting an almost theatrical flourish, turned towards her. "These are authenticated transcripts of text messages dispatched by Miss Adams over the past 3 years. Within these messages, she candidly discusses manipulating her grandfather, her explicit intent to milk the old man dry, her exact words, and elaborates in shocking detail on how she systematically planned to pit family members against one another for her own personal gain." He then distributed printed copies across the table. Charlotte accepted hers in silence. It was the identical fabrication, the same twisted language, the same venomous tone that they had attempted to use to malign her online. But this time, it was physically printed, officially filed, and being treated with disconcerting gravity as if it were indisputable truth. The arbitrator perused the pages, his face an impenetrable mask. When he finally looked up, he addressed her directly. "Ms. Adams, would you care to respond?" Charlotte opened her mouth, then hesitated. She did not have Daniel Cho's forensic analysis readily available. The expert report was not scheduled for presentation until the subsequent hearing. The metadata proof, the server logs, none of it was here, in this moment. She cast a fleeting glance at Arthur, who offered a subtle shake of his head. Turning back to the arbitrator, she stated calmly, "Those messages are not mine. They were fabricated. However, I do not possess the technical report here today to substantiate that claim." Ryan emitted a soft, dismissive chuckle. Vivian, seated directly behind him, leaned forward and spoke without being prompted. "She's always been this way, ever since she was a child, sulking whenever things didn't go her way. Charlotte has been a perpetual thorn in this family's side for years. Walter spoiled her, and now she's tearing us apart because of it." Arthur's voice abruptly cut through the air, sharp and unyielding. "Objection! This constitutes character defamation with no conceivable bearing on the matter at hand." The arbitrator raised a placating hand, bringing quiet to the room. "Let's maintain decorum." But the damage had already been inflicted. Charlotte remained motionless, her heart pounding, not from guilt, but from the overwhelming burden of having no immediate means to retaliate in this critical moment. She was trapped in a room brimming with accusations, her integrity under a relentless assault, and all she could manage was to breathe through the ordeal. The silence surrounding her felt utterly suffocating. Then, Arthur's phone vibrated. He glanced at it as discreetly as possible, then again, his brow furrowing in surprise. He reached into his pocket, subtly lowered the phone beneath the table, and tapped the screen. His eyes widened perceptibly. He looked over at Charlotte, his expression transforming, becoming suddenly alert, intensely focused. A moment later, he leaned towards her and whispered, "Grace just sent us something. She found the original messages, the real ones, from Ryan's computer." Charlotte blinked, taken aback. "Now?" He nodded emphatically. "She uploaded the entire archive to a drive and delivered it directly to our cloud inbox, complete with metadata and precise timestamps. She even included a signed affidavit." Across the table, Ryan remained oblivious, still basking in what he mistakenly perceived as an unchallenged triumph. Vivian leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, radiating the profound satisfaction of someone utterly convinced that the tide had conclusively turned in her favour. Arthur raised his hand. "Your Honour," he addressed the arbitrator, "I respectfully request a 10-minute recess." The arbitrator appeared surprised, but assented with a nod. "Granted. We'll reconvene in 10. As everyone began to stir and shuffle out of the room, Charlotte remained still for a moment, her breath catching up with her rapidly accelerating thoughts. Grace had undeniably switched allegiances, and she had just provided them with everything they needed. Arthur was already on the phone with his paralegal, urgently requesting the emergency inclusion of this newly obtained evidence. Charlotte finally rose, her legs feeling a little unsteady, but her posture ramrod straight. The pervasive silence that had weighed her down mere moments ago now transmuted into something profoundly different. Momentum. Outside the conference room, Grace stood by the elevators, pointedly avoiding Charlotte's gaze. She offered no smile, spoke no words, but provided the slightest, almost imperceptible nod before turning and walking away. Charlotte did not follow. There was no need, because this time, the truth wasn't just on her side, it was firmly in her hands. The following morning, the conference room felt colder, quieter, and strangely charged with tension. Arthur arrived a full 15 minutes early, a slim black USB drive clutched in his hand. Charlotte followed closely behind him, her expression composed, yet her thoughts were a whirlwind. She had spent the majority of the night meticulously reviewing Grace's disclosures, analysing each message, every timestamp, and finally, the crucial audio file. When the arbitration resumed, the room was full, but unnaturally hushed. Ryan appeared noticeably less smug than the previous day, although his attorney still retained his customary air of courtroom confidence. Vivian remained silent, perched stiffly in the back row, her arms folded, her lips pressed into a thin, unyielding line. Arthur was the first to rise. He began, placing the USB drive deliberately on the table before the arbitrator. The arbitrator's eyes narrowed. "Proceed." Arthur inserted the USB into the court laptop, which was connected to the large display screen. "We would like to commence with this brief audio file." The room fell into an absolute stillness. A click. Then Ryan's voice, unmistakably his, played through the speakers, casual and audaciously mocking. She has no idea. I just swapped the file, changed a few lines here and there, cleaned up the signature. Easy. I've seen interns forge worse and get away with it. She won't figure it out. Charlotte never looks for a fight. That's what makes this so clean. The ensuing silence was suffocating. The arbitrator stared, blinking slowly. Ryan sat utterly motionless, and for the first time, his face completely lost its practiced confidence. Arthur continued, his voice unwavering. In addition to this recording, the USB also contains the original, unaltered text messages exchanged between Charlotte Adams and her grandfather. I will now present a brief excerpt. He navigated to a PDF file, projecting it onto the screen. The message was tender, conveying both affection and genuine concern. Hi, Grandpa. Just wanted to check on how you're feeling. I hope the house is helping you rest better. I know you don't want to talk about the family stuff right now, but I want you to know I'm here, and I'm grateful always. Love you, Charlotte. The arbitrator's gaze shifted from the screen to Ryan, then to Arthur. And you're certain these messages are authentic? Arthur presented the notarized forensic report, which had been verified through internal system logs, encrypted backups, and Grace Adams's sworn affidavit. All documentation is available for the court to examine. Ryan finally protested. That's not admissible. However, his lawyer gently placed a hand on his arm, murmuring, Ryan, in a warning tone. The arbitrator raised a hand, interrupting, Enough. He settled back in his chair, drawing a deep breath. I will require time to review this thoroughly. Effective immediately, the arbitration is suspended. We will reconvene tomorrow morning. I will then make a formal recommendation. Arthur inclined his head. Thank you, Your Honour. Ryan rose abruptly, muttered something to his legal counsel, and stormed out of the room. Vivian followed him, pointedly avoiding Charlotte's direction. Charlotte remained motionless, her heart thrumming beneath her ribs. She didn't feel triumphant, not yet. But for the first time in this grueling process, the truth had resonated loudly enough for everyone to hear. Outside, the air was warm, carrying a gentle breeze. Arthur walked beside her, his phone already vibrating with calls from reporters and legal assistants. A few paces behind them was Walter, who had insisted on attending despite his evident weariness. He had observed the proceedings in silence, leaning heavily on his cane, yet his resolve never faltered. As they reached the courthouse steps, he paused. Charlotte turned to him. You okay? Walter offered a faint smile. Just a little tired. He began to take another step, then stumbled. Grandpa! Charlotte caught him just in time, gently lowering him to a bench by the building. His skin had become pale, his breathing short and shallow. Arthur knelt beside them, already contacting emergency services. Walter's hand clutched hers tightly. He attempted to speak once and failed. Then, with a final breath, he whispered, Make it yours. His eyes closed. Charlotte held on to him, tears welling, though not yet falling. The surrounding turmoil receded as his last words echoed in her mind. Not a plea, not a request, but a directive. And she understood in that instant that this was no longer merely about an inheritance, but about a legacy. And she would honour it, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The sky was overcast on the morning of Walter Adams's funeral. A soft, grey light seeped through the stained glass windows of the modest hillside chapel in Montecito, casting gentle hues across the pews. The service was private, precisely as he had wished. There were no elaborate floral displays, no eulogies beyond the brief words Charlotte read aloud, and no public announcement of the time or location. Vivian and Ryan were conspicuously absent. Charlotte stood by the simple casket, her hand resting lightly on the polished wood. There was no bitterness in her heart now, only a quiet ache. Her grandfather had lived with intention, and he had departed in the same manner, on his own terms. Even in his final moments, he had imparted something that could never be lost. Clarity. Arthur was present, seated discreetly in the back. A few of Walter's oldest friends also came, neighbours, fellow veterans, men who had once built fences and harvested grapes alongside him on the family vineyard. No one mentioned the inheritance. No one whispered about the lawsuit. It was a room filled with individuals who remembered Walter, not for his assets, but for his integrity. After the burial, Charlotte returned to the house in Santa Barbara. The silence inside felt different now. It was neither hostile nor hollow, but like a home finally restored to its true self. She walked through the front hall, pausing by the old grandfather clock that had been silent for years. The faint scent of cedar lingered in the air. A soft ocean breeze drifted through the curtains like a sigh. On the desk in the library lay a sealed envelope bearing her name in her grandfather's unmistakable handwriting. Tucked beneath it was a thick folder neatly tied with a red ribbon. She opened the letter first. "Charlotte, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And I hope the last thing I said to you stays with you. Make it yours. You've spent a long time fighting not just for property, but for your place in a family that forgot who you are. I didn't. Everything is yours now. The house, the Arizona land, the Veterans Fund. But more than that, what I leave you is the name. The Adams name, not as they've twisted it, but as I tried to live it. I was wrong to stay silent so long. I thought I could keep the peace by waiting. I see now that peace is only real when the truth is allowed to stand. You stood up when I couldn't. For that, I owe you more than any inheritance. I owe you my trust, my legacy. Don't let them take that from you again. Love, Grandpa." Her hands trembled slightly as she refolded the letter. Inside the folder, as promised, was the final legal will. It had been notarized and filed 3 weeks before Walter's death. Every signature, every page, every clause had been meticulously reviewed and recorded. It superseded all previous versions and left no ambiguity. Charlotte Adams was now the sole legal heir to the estate, the land, the foundation fund, and all assets connected to Walter Adams's name. She slowly sat down at the edge of the leather reading chair where Walter had spent so many afternoons, a heavy stillness settling over her. It wasn't victory she felt, not the sharp, triumphant rush of having won. It was something deeper, validation. All those years of being quietly marginalized, all the moments she had bitten her tongue while others spoke over her, the unacknowledged birthdays, the meetings she wasn't invited to, the wedding that felt like a performance. She hadn't imagined any of it. And now every lie had unraveled publicly, legally, irrefutably. But more than that, he had believed her until the very end. He had seen who she truly was, not the black sheep, not the outsider, not the naive granddaughter out of her depth. He had seen a survivor, a rightful heir. She walked to the window overlooking the cliffs and the ocean beyond, clutching the letter to her chest. The waves crashed against the rocks below in a steady rhythm, not unlike a heartbeat. This view, this house, was hers now, but the responsibility that came with it was far greater than any mere title. Charlotte took a deep breath. Tomorrow there would be more documents to sign. Arthur would arrange the official transfers. The media might still probe. Ryan and Vivian might attempt another challenge. But none of that mattered now, because today she finally stood on ground that could not be moved. Not given by convenience, not borrowed by favour, but earned through fire, through silence, through truth. And she would carry it forward. The restoration process spanned months. Charlotte collaborated with architects who respected the original structure, preserving the red-tiled roof, the coastal archways, and the wraparound porch that had weathered decades of California sun and sea. The house was no longer merely a private residence. It was evolving into something more substantial. With the Arizona vineyard once again generating income and the estate fully secured, Charlotte allocated a portion of the proceeds towards establishing a community center on the southern edge of the property. It would offer literacy classes, support for veterans, and mentorship for at-risk teenagers. The center was modest, yet imbued with purpose, just as Walter himself had always been. She named it the Adams Foundation for Dignity and Restoration. Each room was designed to feel welcoming, from the small art studio tucked into the back hallway to the kitchen where volunteers could serve meals. Charlotte spent time there every week, helping organize, teaching grant writing skills, or sometimes simply listening. She did not publicize her involvement. There were no plaques bearing her name. It wasn't about that. One late afternoon, as summer began its transition into early fall, Charlotte was finishing some work in the library when she heard soft footsteps reverberate on the porch. She glanced up through the window. A young girl in her mid-teens with brown hair and a backpack slung low stood hesitantly at the gate. It was Lily. Charlotte hadn't seen her since before the hearing. The girl looked older now, more guarded, but her inquisitive eyes remained unchanged. Charlotte stepped outside and opened the gate. "Hi," Lily said tentatively. "Hi, sweetheart," Charlotte replied gently. "Do you want to come in?" Lily nodded. They walked inside and settled at the kitchen table. Charlotte poured her a glass of lemonade and waited. After a moment, Lily looked up. "Dad always said you stole everything, that you tricked Grandpa, that the whole court thing was fake. He still says that." Charlotte kept her voice steady. "And what do you think?" Lily hesitated, then reached into her backpack and pulled out her phone. "I found this a few weeks ago. It was in one of Grandpa's old folders on a flash drive. I think he recorded it by accident, or maybe on purpose." She tapped the screen. A recording played, Walter's voice clear and resolute. "I'm not confused. I know exactly what I'm doing. I gave that house to Charlotte because she's the only one who ever asked what I needed. The rest, they only ever asked what I could give." Then silence. Lily looked at her. "I think he trusted you more than he ever trusted Dad. Maybe more than anyone." Charlotte felt something tighten in her chest. Not pain, not relief. Something quieter, deeper. A kind of peace she hadn't known in years. She reached into a small dish on the counter and pulled out an old brass key. She placed it in Lily's hand. "Your grandfather used to hide this under the loose stone by the front door. He told me once, this house should always have someone in it who remembers what it costs to build." Lily's gaze fell upon the key. "You don't have to take sides," Charlotte murmured gently. "But when you're ready, the door will open." Lily remained silent, merely nodding and closing her fingers around the small object before departing as quietly as she arrived, now devoid of fear. Later that evening, as the sun descended beyond the horizon, Charlotte stood on the front porch, observing the sky ablaze with hues of gold and amber. The distant ocean's murmur provided a soft backdrop. The lilac tree in the garden, a cherished memory of her and Walter's shared past, swayed softly in the evening breeze. Her eyes then settled upon the bronze plaque affixed near the entrance. "In honor of Walter Adams, a house reclaimed, a name restored." She traced its surface with a delicate touch. This endeavor, she reflected, was never about vengeance. It was about discovering the truth, about choosing to dismantle a history of silence, not with resentment, but with constructive renewal. Behind her, the house radiated the welcoming glow of fresh starts. The community kitchen, still bustling with volunteers, echoed with joyful laughter. Children's voices resonated from the reading room. The future, she realized, had arrived, and she held the very key to it. We appreciate you remaining with us through to the conclusion of Charlotte's narrative, a journey that encompassed not only the restoration of a home or an inheritance, but also the reclamation of truth, her inherent dignity, and the legacy her grandfather had entrusted to her care. Ultimately, The most significant aspect was not a triumph in court, but rather the quiet, steadfast conviction that healing possesses greater strength than vengeance, and that upholding someone's values can embody the profoundest form of justice. What are your reflections on Charlotte's decisions? Have you ever encountered a juncture where asserting yourself meant standing in solitude? We eagerly await your insights in the comments section below. If this account resonated with you or prompted introspection, please consider subscribing to our channel. A wealth of additional emotional, impactful, and stimulating stories awaits you there. Tales of resilience, unexpected betrayal, ultimate redemption, and enduring hope. We appreciate you watching, and we look forward to seeing you next time.